Today we're going to look at replacing the conductor plate here on this 2011 Dodge Charger. Now this is a ZF transmission, and this is a pretty typical issue with this particular transmission. You can see the speed sensors in here go bad, pretty common, and also the connector that goes through the side of the transmission is known for leaking and wicking out. And so if we look up at the connector in the corner of the pan, you can see where it's kind of wet and got some seepage going on. So I'm going to access the connector here, and you can see I twist this collar, and as I do that, it releases the wire harness. And so now I'm pulling it out, and you can see we've definitely got some leakage going on here. So we've got fluid leaking out. Now I'm going to take a ratchet and a 7mm socket and an extension, and there's a bolt in the middle of this unit, which is actually holding it in place. So I have to kind of fish around, but once I get to it, now I just back that bolt out. Okay, my bolt is loose. I'm going to reposition my drain pan here, and now there's a couple O-rings kind of holding that in place. And since I'm not going to reuse this one, I feel comfortable using a pry bar or kind of knocking it out. So I don't have to put a whole lot of pressure, but you can see the fluid drains off, and I remove the connector here, and two O-rings come out. I'm draining the fluid out, and actually the next thing I need to do is drop the pan. So some people might choose to actually drop the pan first. Well, here I'm getting a little bit of my controlled spill out of the way initially. So the next thing I'm going to do is take my T30 TORX with a ratchet and extension, and I'm going to work my way around the pan, loosening the pan bolts. So relatively straightforward, no hidden bolts here. Just going to work my way around, loosen these, and then I'll drain it down. Gives me access to the valve body and to that conductor plate. All right, well, I got the pan off now, and the way I like to do this is leave the back bolts in, work your way around, then gradually loosen them. It tilts the pan down so I get a controlled drain instead of a big old mess all over the floor. So yeah, I kept myself relatively clean and kept the floor clean. So now I've gone around, and we have to remove the valve body assembly here. So there's bolts all the way around, but there's one relatively hidden one kind of towards the front here. And be careful, you're going to get fluid coming out with this as well. So no matter how clean I thought I was, I'm going to still get dirty. But once I get these all out, now my unit is coming down, and I'm ready to separate the ECU and my connector plate from the valve body itself. Okay, so you see I've got the unit down here. Here's my plate on the top of it. See my speed sensors right here where my fault is, and where my pass-through connector goes through, right there. So now I have to remove this plate from the valve body, and I have to transfer some of these solenoid packs from one to the other. So again, I'm still using my T30. Got a couple screws here, or bolts rather, which I'm going to be loosening, and I'm going to get these off, and I'm going to set them aside separately. I want to keep them in order. We're not going to be doing any swapping around here. Perhaps somebody more versed in transmissions than myself says, oh yeah, you can do that. I prefer to take things off, set them aside orderly, and put them back exactly where I got them. So I'm going to go about my way here and separate this, get my components transferred over, and get my new conductor plate mounted back to the valve body. Okay, so I've removed a couple bolts, pulled all the solenoid components out, and then there's a couple little plastic clips, one in the front corner, and then kind of over on the side here. So I've got my old connector plate disconnected, and I'm ready to take my new one and put that in. So we got the new one. There's a little foam protection piece inside here. So now I'm going to line this up properly, and we will slide it down and get her locked into place. So once it's locked down, clipped in there, now I'm going to take my solenoids. Now there's a fair amount of oil on here, but I'm still going to take a little bit more transmission fluid and slide them back in place in the direction where I got them off from. See, there's connectors. We slide them in, and again, very orderly, just reinstall these in the same location which I removed the previous ones. Once I get them all in place, I can put the hold downs in, screw this thing in place, and we're ready to raise it back up, and I'll bolt this entire valve body back onto the transmission, put the pan on, fill it with fluid, and well, before I fill it with fluid, I will insert the new connector. So let's pick it up there. All right, got the valve body up there with our new conductor plate, and got the pan up, torqued everything in place. I followed the torque specs on torquing the plate as well as the pan. So now I've got my new pass-through connector, and so I'm going to take some fresh transmission fluid and I'm rubbing that on the O-rings here. It's going to help lubricate these as I slide it into place here. So there's a couple alignment dowels on this, and so I need to be careful, get those lined up properly. Now I need to kind of work this in there and get it installed into place. So once I feel it click in, now I'm going to take my ratchet with my 7mm again, and it will get on the bolt there and draw this in the rest of the way. Okay, so I'll draw this down using the bolt now, get it nice and snug so it's seated in there. There's the two O-rings there. And so now I will take my electrical connector, and again, I got to get that lined up just right. There's some line up tabs in here now, and I have to get that lined up just right. Don't want to bend the electrical pins in there. We need to get that lined up. And so once I get it lined up, now I'm going to have to work it back and forth here a little bit. All right, there, locked into place now. And so now I'll kind of push on that as I rotate the locking collar. And we got to kind of work it back and forth a little bit until I get it locked all the way up in place. And then it's time to go in, clear any trouble codes that may have been set by the previous one. You got to follow the factory procedure for topping off the fluid. So I'm going to start by adding a couple quarts, running it through the gears. Then I'm going to start the vehicle up, use the scan tool to measure the transmission temperature, match it up to a chart, and use the specified additional dipstick that I had to purchase to measure the fluid level on these and top it off. Then we're going to take the vehicle out on the road, drive it, run it through the gears, make sure everything's working properly, and do any additional relearns required before giving it back to the customer. Hopefully now you understand what's required to replace this connector and the electronic conductor plate that holds the solenoids in place on the ZF transmission, in this example 2011 Dodge Charger.